So with that, why don't we get started? I want to just welcome everyone to another fantastic installment in the Agroforestry webinar series. This is a series of informational webinars that's hosted by the Delta Institute, Savanna Institute, and the Liberty Prairie Foundation. This is the 6th webinar in this series. So if you're curious about our previous sessions and previous topics, you can find the recordings of those webinars on either the Delta Institute or the Savanna Institute's YouTube channels. Before we begin today's session, which is entitled Right Crop, Right Market, we'd like to just take a moment to introduce ourselves and to share a little information about our collective efforts and why we are working together to promote agroforestry adoption in the Midwest and beyond. My name is Lucas Chamberlain with the Delta Institute. Delta helps Midwestern communities solve complex environmental problems. Within our Resilient Agriculture Initiative, Delta is working to promote the adoption of soil conservation practices to farmers across the Midwest, many of which fall under the umbrella of agroforestry, such as installing working trees in the form of alley cropping, windbreaks, riparian buffers, or integrating livestock. And I'm really happy to be here. So I'll hand it off to our next partner.
So my name is Nathan Aaberg with the Liberty Prairie Foundation. We're a nonprofit organization based in Grays Lake, Illinois, in the Prairie Crossing Conservation Community. We have a 94-acre farm, and we're all about developing, demonstrating, and supporting ways of using nature that enable nature and people to thrive together. And we have education programs. We do work with public and private farmland owners. We're very excited about agroforestry. And in fact, we have a food forest on our farm that was implemented by our resident farmers, Prairie Wind Family Farm. Again, we're really excited to be part of this.
Thank you, Lucas and Nathan. My name is Kaitie Adams, and along with my colleagues on the call today, Bill Davison, MJ, Barbara and Sven and Jen and other folks from Savanna Institute, I'm excited to partner with Delta Institute and Liberty Prairie Foundation to show the power of agroforestry on our Midwestern landscapes to both diversify our farmlands and farm fields, but also our businesses and our food shed. And so the Savanna Institute is a nonprofit organization. We're based in both Illinois and Wisconsin, but work broadly across the Midwest. And our focus is on laying the groundwork for widespread agroforestry adoption. So we do this in a variety of ways that's mostly focused on research, education, and outreach. So we have a variety of programs from demonstration farms to a technical service program to an apprenticeship program that can really connect folks to the roles that trees can play on our agricultural landscapes. So now that you've heard a little bit about us, we want to know a little bit about you.
Great, so I'm going to launch this first poll here. We want to know, who are you? Which of the following of the questions that you see on your screen best represents your role in agriculture? And we will share the results after we have everyone in here. Looks like we're getting lots of answers. It's great. All right, let's see what we have. We want to share here. And hopefully are we able to see the results here on screen? Excellent. Looks like we have a good spread. We've got farmers and landowners, folks from federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, a good spread. Excellent. And we have another question here that we would like to ask. We would like to know what brings you to today's session. So here on the screen, you can see a few questions. What brings you to today's session? We've got the results pouring in. I'll leave it open just for a few more moments. All right, let's see what we got. looks like we already have some folks that practice agroforestry and want to learn more. The majority are interested in helping their clients to implement or practice agroforestry. And of course, we've got some curious folks too who love working trees. We're happy to see that. Okay. Now we have one final poll for you. And we would like to know your thoughts on barriers to implementing agroforestry. In your opinion, what is the primary barrier to transitioning to fruit and nut crops for you or the farmers that you work with? I know there's lots of options here, so feel free to take your time and look through them. Getting lots of participation. This is great. I will. Amanda says it was difficult to pick just one. All right, let's see what folks say. We've got a good spread. Looks like economic return, not enough knowledge or experience are the primary barriers people are finding. Establishment and maintenance are too expensive, and the market, there's not a clear market. So you're in the right place. Okay, that was our final poll. So thank you very much. And let's begin our presentations.
Thanks so much, Lucas. And thanks for everyone for participating in those polls. It's great to see what brings folks here today. And that also helps us as presenters tailor not only this webinar, but future webinars to what folks want to know. So if you're joining us for the first time, I'm going to quickly go through kind of the basics of agroforestry so that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about today. So agroforestry is an integrated approach to farming with trees and livestock. And as you can see here, there's lots of different benefits to agroforestry that include food production, carbon sequestration, improvements in water quality and soil health, as well as wildlife habitat support that also can help improve livestock comfort and also crop yields and production. And when I say agroforestry, what we mostly mean in the United States is the use of 5 particular practices that are supported by the USDA. And a flag here that these 5 practices are not the only ways to practice agroforestry. There are hundreds of different ways, if not thousands, depending on your landscape and your context, your history and culture. But we're going to focus on the 5 today as they're ones that are supported by the USDA, but also are cost shared using some government programs. So the first one is alley cropping, which is the cultivation of crops between alleys or in alleys between regularly spaced rows of trees or shrubs. So in this illustration, we see row crop production happening in the alleys between trees, but that can also be annual specialty crop production or even perennial production of other tree fruit and shrubs, as well as nuts. The second is silvopasture, which is the integration of trees, pasture, and livestock. And so this can be done by adding trees to pasture, which is what we call silvopasture by addition, or taking trees away from forested areas that helps improve forest health, helps produce forage for livestock, and also supports the health of the livestock themselves. And so I want to flag that these are highly intentional and integrated systems. And so these aren't just turning animals out into the woods. They're really designed and implemented to balance ecological health as well as production. The third practice are riparian buffers, where we're planting herbaceous and woody things alongside streams, lakes, or wetlands. And within agroforestry, this is done in a way to either help improve crop production adjacent to those waterways while protecting water quality, or incorporating production into the species that we choose to plant along riparian buffers. The fourth are windbreaks, which are strips of trees and shrubs designed to enhance crop or livestock production, while also providing conservation benefits. So this includes stopping or slowing down wind, stopping or slowing down drift, providing advantageous microclimates, and generally boosting ecological resilience. And then the last is forest farming. And this is the cultivation of specialty crops under existing forest canopies. So it can be things like mushrooms or medicinals like ginseng or golden seal. This is one we don't see so much where I'm at in central Illinois, but we can see in different parts of the Midwest in the United States. And so with that kind of basis of introduction, today we're going to be focusing on right crops in the right markets. And because we don't have a large amount of time, we're going to focus on 4 promising perennial crops, specifically for Midwest agroforestry. And so I want to first off start by saying that there are hundreds and hundreds of woody and herbaceous species that can be integrated into these agroforestry systems, depending on your goals, your context, and what you want to see happen on your land and in your business. But today, my colleague Bill and I are really going to focus on 4 crops that have the potential to be particularly successful within these systems in Midwest landscapes and Midwest markets. And those are elderberry, black currant, hazelnut, and chestnut. And so I'm going to cover kind of the basic characteristics and needs and landscape level considerations for these crops. And then my colleague Bill will follow up with a deeper exploration of those markets and business level considerations. For perennial crops to be successful, we're going to need both a deep understanding of how to grow those, how to grow that crop, but also how to harvest, how to process, and how to sell that crop as well. So at this point, you might be wondering, like, why these 4 kind of relatively unknown crops? Why not focus on things we see in the grocery store, like apples or peaches or pears, things that we're pretty familiar with? And I want to flag that these crops, at least in the horticultural way that we see them in the grocery store, are not native to the United States or the Midwest. And so they often face like heavy nutrient, pest and disease pressure and challenges, along with some labor challenges as well. And also depending on where you're located in the Midwest, your soils or your climate might not be particularly well suited for these crops, which makes them kind of a risky choice, especially within the face of increasingly unpredictable climate and weather, as we're seeing right now with the increases of wildfire and the onset of drought, especially here in central Illinois, where I am. But these cultivars that we're going to be talking about today of elderberry and black currant and hazelnut and chestnut are either closely related to their native relatives that grow naturally here, or they have many of the same needs as their native counterparts. And breeding work by the Savanna Institute, which I'll mention briefly at the end of the presentation, are showing really great promise for these particular species to be lower maintenance, higher yielding options for diverse perennial systems that are truly designed for both conservation and profit. So these native adjacent crops have emerging markets that have promised scalability as well. So Bill is going to talk way more about that in his part of the webinar, but it's worth mentioning here. So without further ado, let's get into the crops themselves. So we're going to start with elderberry. This one might be one that you're becoming more familiar with because of its rise within the pharmaceutical market, or even within jams and jellies, or elderberry wine, which you or your grandparents might be familiar with. And another reason you might be familiar with it is because it grows all over the Midwest. This is a fruiting shrub that is highly adaptable. I often see it in ditches, alongside creeks and rivers, because it's often found in riparian areas that will flood, and then those flood waters will recede. And it grows in full sun and partial sun, so there's a lot of different places where it can naturally grow. So it makes it a good adaptable crop for the Midwest. Another great thing about elderberry, it has 2 harvestable crops. It has the flowers, which can be used for cordials or other value-added products, and also the berries themselves. And one note is that you need multiple plants for cross-pollination. So that's important when thinking about planting for this crop. It's a naturally hedge-forming crop, so its in-row spacing often mimics kind of close spacing together, because that's the habitat it likes to form in. So we recommend 4 foot between plants for in-row spacing and about 10 to 12 feet between the rows. That 10 to 12 feet is for harvestability, it's for airflow and disease prevention, And then also for maintenance to be able to get in and do what you need for your crops. The canopy spread is about 6 to 8 feet, which is about the same as the plant height itself. And these are multi-stem plants, so that can vary a little bit depending on the plant. When we're thinking about what types of elderberries we want to choose, especially for production, there's some really good Midwest developed varieties, including Bob Gordon and Wildwood. There's another one that has an unfortunate name that's named after where it's from, called Pocahontas, that's also showing some commercial promises. So when they're doing breeding for elderberries, they're looking for uniform ripening and particular ripening windows, as well as cluster sizes for both flowers and berries. Elderberry can produce pretty fast for a perennial crop. We see 2 years to partial bearing and 3 years to full bearing, where it's going to come into full production. The harvest season from flowers runs from about June to July, depending on where you are. And the harvest season for fruit is July through September. Now, elderberry is something that is only hand harvested, so that harvest hours per acre can be pretty high. So anywhere from 160 to 650. We have new data coming out, so that number is probably going to change soon as we have new information on cultivars. With a maximum yield, and this is a flag under ideal conditions, which often we never hit, of about 6,000 pounds an acre. It is worth mentioning that though while elderberry are mostly pest and disease resistant, one particular pest to be aware of is spotted winged Drosophila, which is a fly that lays their eggs in soft fruit. And so this is kind of an emergent pest that we're keeping an eye on. And there's other ones that are related to humidity and also some bug pests. So the next crop on our list are black currants. So this one might be completely unfamiliar to you, and there's a reason why that is. Black currants have been banned in the United States, were banned in the United States for quite a long time because they started to harbor something called white pine blister rust, which was threatening the timber industry in the East. And so they were outlawed in the United States because they were a disease vector. But now we have white pine blister rust resistant varieties, and that ban has been lifted almost everywhere except for a couple states on the East Coast. So this is a crop that we're seeing reemerge on farm landscapes and reemerge into markets. We're really excited about black currants because, like elderberry, it's pretty highly adaptable. So it consists in a high range of zones. The drainage is adaptable, but I will flag that it does not tolerate standing water, and it does not like heavy clay soils, which can also contribute to standing water within farm fields. And the most exciting thing for agroforestry systems, where we're often combining different species in one spaces, is that black currants can produce in full sun to part shade. And this producing in part shade, I think, is particularly key as we're thinking about the ways that we layer different size canopies onto our landscape. Another thing to flag is that black currants are late bloomers, which is great when we have unpredictable spring frosts and freezes, where we might see blooms freezing off of things like apples or peaches. But because black currants flower a little bit later, they're a little bit more protected. They also need at least 500 chill hours to fruit, which means that during the year, we need 500 hours under 45 degrees. And so if you're in a really warm place, this might not be one for you, but in cooler climes, this can be a really great producer. So when it comes to spacing, you can also space these pretty tight. So 1 to 3 feet, depending on if you're planning to harvest by hand or machine. I'll talk about harvest a little bit later, with 12 to 14 feet between rows. Spacing is really important, especially for airflow, because black currants can be prone to fungal diseases that come from high humidity and water sitting in row. The canopy spread is 3 to 6 feet, depending on the cultivar, and then the plant height is 4 to 5 feet. Similar to elderberry, there are things that like to grow in a hedge or in a hedge, so they like that growing growing architecture. When it comes to plant selection, there wasn't a lot of choices for a very long time. Some of the classic choices you might have heard of are growing in folks' gardens are consort, cornet, and crusader, which tend to be a little more astringent, have a little bit of a lower sugar content. But newer varieties that have been bred to have white pine blister rust resistance also have some really good high quality fruit that's a little bit sweeter, a little bit bigger, and have higher yields. And some of those varieties include Titania, Blackcomb, Chicamoose, and Stikine. I will note for folks that are in warmer areas, in warmer and more humid areas, that we've seen some fungal disease on Stikine, so just wanted to flag that. When it comes to production of black currants, we have 3 years to partial bearing, with year 5 being when they come into full production, with the harvest season of June to August, depending on the cultivar. Harvest is 12 to 770 hours per acre. And the reason we have this giant spread is because black currants can be machine harvested if the right varieties are selected and the spacing is right. So this is a picture on the right of Joanna 3, which is a Polish black currant harvester. And so for commercial production, this can be a great choice for mechanical harvest. And black currants have a max yield of 4,000 pounds an acre. I already mentioned that they can be susceptible to fungal diseases, especially cane dieback, but air circulation and good pruning can really help with that. And under the right conditions, this is a particularly good crop that's well suited for organic production. The next crop is our first nut crop that we're going to chat about, and this is hazelnut. And today I'm just going to talk about European and American hybrid hazelnuts. European hazelnuts are the ones that we eat the most of here in the United States and around the world, but they don't grow well in this climate. American native hazelnuts grow well across the Midwest, but they have low nut size, they're lower yielding. And so we're going to focus on this hybrid hazelnut that has been in breeding development for the past couple of decades. And so these hybrid hazelnuts have also a pretty adaptable zone. And one exciting thing is that these are pretty drought tolerant. They can do well when we don't have a lot of rain. So the hazelnuts that here in Central Illinois during our drought are actually looking pretty good. In that same vein, it doesn't like soils that are continuously saturated. It has pretty shallow and lateral roots, and so it doesn't like to get its feet wet. But one thing that is also important to note is that hazelnuts produce best in full sun, but they can tolerate some partial shade. So if pumping out the production isn't your primary goal, then hazelnuts can do okay as they're kind of an edge of woods or into transition into savanna and prairie lands. And also a flag that multiple plants are needed for pollination. When it comes to spacing, allow 3 to 5 feet in row for the hazelnuts, especially if you plan on machine harvesting, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and then spacing between rows 10 to 15 feet. The canopy spread is about 5 to 8, and the height itself is about 8 to 12 feet tall. When it comes to plant selection, there's some promising cultivars that are coming out of the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative, including Grand Traverse and Beast. These are some varieties that we're trialing at the Savanna Institute in multiple locations with partners across the Midwest. So we'll have more information on these hazelnuts when they start bearing, but these are ones that we want more information of, so we can track it to see if they're viable for commercial production. When it comes to bearing, they're pretty quick for a nut. So we have 3 to 6 years for partial bearing and 8 years to full bearing, with a harvest season that stretches at the end of summer into the spring. When it comes to harvest hours, it's anywhere from 2 to 211 hours per acre. That 2 is machine harvest. Bill's going to talk a little bit about machine harvest in his section, but there is some interesting developments when it comes to machine harvest of hazelnuts. and hand harvest is kind of what's happening on most places now. Hazelnuts have a maximum yield of 1,700 to 2,200 pounds per acre, and we'll get more information as these promising cultivars start to produce more. And then when it comes to pest and disease, Eastern Philibert blight used to be a major issue, but these varieties have been bred to be resistant to that. And so big pests are going to be squirrels, mice, chipmunks, birds that like to eat hazelnuts. So that's one thing to flag there. Okay, the last one kind of crop overview that we have are Chinese chestnuts. And we're focusing on Chinese chestnuts because these are ones that are pretty well adapted to our climate and some of our soils here in the Midwest. American chestnuts were the canopy overstory species of the eastern forest lands of the United States and extended out west to parts of the Midwest. And because of chestnut blight, those are no longer viable trees, although there is breeding work to bring back American chestnut. And so we're focusing on Chinese chestnut as a production alternative to that, the American chestnut tree. So unlike the other crops I've talked about, chestnuts have a more constrained zone requirement. So we're looking at 6A to 8, mostly because many chestnuts are not super cold hardy. And that depends on the cultivar and where you are. They are also pickier on their soils. So chestnuts require acidic, sandy or loamy, well-drained soils. And because they have a taproot, they need 4 to 6 feet of soil before you hit bedrock or another restricted layer. And they do not tolerate high water tables. So the site selection and the context are really important for chestnuts. They also need full light to produce, and multiple plants are needed for pollination. When it comes to spacing, I just put the final kind of spacing in here. When you're establishing chestnuts, you can absolutely plant them closer, but you want to shoot for your final spacing after thinning to be between 42 and 45 feet. Most spacing ends up being in that sort of grid pattern of chestnuts because their canopy spread is 40 to 60 feet and their height is also 40 to 60 feet. So when you're considering chestnuts, you have to think of their final spacing down the line when they're coming into full production, because they're going to be in the ground for 75, 100 plus years. When it comes to plant selection, I'm not going to list any specific cultivars because that's entirely based on where you are in your context. But one thing that I will note is that when you're thinking about selecting plants is to think if you want grafted versus ungrafted trees. So grafted trees can lead to more predictable harvest timing, and you know the nut quality because you know the parents. Sorry, but they can be expensive. Now, if you go from seedling trees, where you know the parents, but they are grown from seed, they can have some higher vigor, and but they're going to be slower to produce, and you might have some unknowns within the nut production, but they are much cheaper. With Chinese chestnuts, you'll get precocious bearing around year 3, which seems really fast, right? But they won't come into full bearing for 12 to 15 years. So this is one that's a big investment because they take a much longer to produce. Their harvest season is in the fall, so September or October. Chestnuts have harvest hours between 5 and 70 per acre, depending on what method you're using to harvest. There's hand harvest and even semi-mechanated ways to harvest, but you have a max yield of 300 or 3,000 pounds per acre. And Bill will talk more about the market and talk more about how chestnuts can be a really great option, even though they take a long time to bear. Chinese chestnuts suffer relatively few pests and diseases, But one thing to watch out for that we're seeing issues with right now are potato leafhoppers. So we've seen this as a persistent pest on our trees and our demo farms for the past couple of years. But there's also some other pests to watch out for as well. And so to wrap up here, I'll just say that this is a pretty high level overview of what these plant needs, but plant selection, site preparation, pest management, pruning, weed management, and nutrient management are really gonna be the keys to success of these crops. So when you have the basic information, you can start to learn what's gonna work best for your farm and your business, but all of these other things are vitally important. So be sure to go back and watch the webinar on planning and designing, and then we're also gonna be having a webinar on management coming up at the end of the series. So just wanted to flag that as a very important note on the success of these crops. And with that, I'll end by saying that Savanna Institute has a whole team of folks that are working to develop new and improved cultivars, as well as lots of crop research and ecosystem research that will help growers and landholders make really informed decisions on these crops. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bill.
And while Bill is bringing up his presentation, just want to say again, thank you, Kaitie, for that very informative presentation. If you have any questions, folks in the audience, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A option, and we will answer those after Bill's presentation.
Okay, can you see my slides okay?
Yeah, I think we'll want to do the slideshow option, but we can see your screen.
Okay. So I'm Bill Davison. I'm the Value Chain Development Manager with the Savanna Institute, and I'm going to talk about marketing agroforestry crops. I'll provide an overview of chestnuts, hazelnuts, elderberries, and black currants. And one of the key points that I hope you take away from this presentation is that marketing is challenging, labor intensive, and rewarding. So it is possible to do well. You just have to be organized and committed to it. It takes a team of skilled people working as hard as the people growing the crops to succeed. Before I get to the profiles, I'd like to provide some context around our work with marketing and supply chain development. It's an exciting time to work in agroforestry, and we're seeing a lot of interest and support for our work from organizations and people that are working to transition to a more regenerative food system. And it's clear to us that this change is coming. We're hearing this in our conversations with small startups and the largest food companies in the world. So it's not a question of if, but rather when. We face plenty of barriers in our work, but we're also seeing those barriers fall away. And this is partly due to the fact that agroforestry crops are on trend and they align with modern consumer preferences that include plant-based foods, local foods, superfruits, and clean labels. A farmer in Missouri that we work with who switched from growing corn and soybeans to growing chestnuts and elderberries summed up his experience with agroforestry in this way when he told me, "It's really nice to grow a crop that people want to buy." So here's an example of the crop he's selling. These tiny dark berries are elderberries, and there's very well documented research showing health benefits and immune system support from these berries, and that facilitates market demand. So they're a popular crop, and more of them are being planted every year. And then the other crop that this farmer is growing, chestnuts, are sold by Roger Smith here with Prairie Grove Chestnut Growers. So Roger is an aggregator in southeast Iowa. So there are farmers that will sell wholesale to Roger, and then he does the marketing with the chestnuts. We're still in the early stages of market development for chestnuts. So the majority of them are sold direct to consumer, either off the farm or through people like Roger. But we're also laying the groundwork for future larger scale markets. And one of the interesting things about chestnuts is that their starch is very similar to corn. So over the long term, we will be replacing corn with chestnuts for some types of markets. But ultimately, it's our values, priorities, and judgment that need to shift to support more diversified food systems. And this is what will create opportunities for more diverse crops to find a market. We need to place more of our faith in people, plants, and agrarian skills and less in technology. Technology is amazing and mesmerizing, and it has a role to play, but it's not going to save us. Perennial crops produce much stronger returns compared to annuals. Agroforestry crops like chestnuts produce $2,000 to $4,000 of net profit per acre. And this comes at maturity, as Kaitie mentioned, 12 to 15 years. So the challenge is getting to maturity. And this is where companies like the Savanna Institute and Cargill come in. So this is an image of Mountain Gentry Farms in Kentucky and their chestnut nursery. So we're looking at quite an expanse of young chestnut trees growing in pots here that'll be sold to farmers around the Midwest. And this is just to show the kind of demand that we're seeing for chestnuts. And Matt Schmidt works for Cargill, and he helps farmers get started with chestnuts. So Matt says that they connect farmers' produce, like chestnuts that they're producing, with those who can use it. We work out the points of friction for the farmer, mainly the high upfront costs, and we structure projects to attract investors who are patient enough to wait for the trees to grow. So I know people indicated that this upfront investment and the time growing the trees is a barrier that they see for growing crops like chestnuts. But one of the shifts that's happening is that the investment community is becoming aligned with the reality of perennial crop production. So it's going to be easier in the future to get financing that matches up with tree crops. Another interesting fact about Cargill is that they support 75 farms with 600,000 trees and shrubs on 20,000 acres across the United States. And as part of this system, landowners are developing 20-year leases where they receive annual payments of $150 to $250 per acre, and they can still use the land between the trees for other enterprises. So this would include things like hay, pasture, and alley cropping. But to realize the potential of agroforestry, we need to rebuild regional food systems, and this entails complex coordination and networking in the areas of policy, plant breeding, technical support, infrastructure development, and marketing. All this work is gaining momentum and elevating the standing of agroforestry in the minds of consumers. The food system of the future will contain a diverse mix of perennial crops with small areas of annuals mixed in. I often think of a paper that I read a couple years ago when I reflect on the potential of agroforestry to feed people. And this paper documented that everyone in Chicago could be fed by food grown within 50 miles of Chicago. And that's just incredible to think about, the productive capacity of the land, the abundance that we're capable of producing here in the Midwest. It's also interesting to think about what that would look like, what the land would look like. It would be more green, there'd be more perennial cover, the water would be more clear, and a lot of people would have meaningful work to do. Agroforestry is the key to realizing this vision, and chestnuts play a prominent role. So this is an image of a farm in Missouri. This is the farmer I mentioned who switched from row crops to hybrid chestnuts and elderberries. And that's what we're looking at here is a hybrid chestnut orchard that's been undersown to wheat. The wheat is near harvest, and this farmer gets the same yields growing the wheat in his orchard as he did out in the open field. But the chestnut production in the Midwest or the Eastern US in general is based on hybrid chestnuts that primarily contain Chinese chestnut genetics. So they're resistant to the blight that impacted American chestnuts. There are quite a few other species of chestnuts. They can often have complex genetic backgrounds, but Chinese chestnuts are typically the predominant genetics in the trees. And thousands of years of selection by Chinese farmers turned a forest tree into an orchard tree. So these trees have the compact shape and growth form of an orchard tree. The primary markets are direct to consumer. They're primarily to immigrant communities and large urban centers. And we are nowhere near meeting that demand. So in the near term, that is a primary market for chestnuts. And farmers reach these markets through U-Pick, online sales, selling to aggregators, depending on where you're located, and more conventional means like farmers markets and community-supported agriculture. This is an example of one of the larger scale markets that we're working towards. Simple Mills is based out of Chicago, but they're an emerging food company. And you can find these pancakes on store shelves. These are chestnut flour pancakes. So there's no grain in these pancakes. They're currently made with flour from Italy. And we are working with Simple Mills on integrating Midwest grown chestnut flour into these pancakes. And so over time, as our industry develops, we will hopefully convert more of this product to local chestnut flour, and we will have chestnuts in a form that American consumers are happy to eat. Okay, this is a slide. I wanted to share this slide. This is data from Bob Staley in Northern Ohio, who is an amazing chestnut grower. He's got 160 acres of chestnuts. He's been growing them for 25 years now. And so what this shows.
Bill, do you mind if I pause you for 1 sec? We're having trouble seeing this slide. It's just a blank screen for us. Oh, there it is.
Okay, you can see it now.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so there's the blue line above the orange line. Basically what this is showing is Bob buying 25 acres of land. So the blue line is his costs. So he bought the land and he paid the full cost of establishing the trees, putting up a fence, mowing the grass, managing the orchard over the years. The intriguing part of this graph is when you approach year 10, 11, and 12, and he broke even in year 12. But then if you look at that orange graph, basically the profits after year 12, that is when chestnuts become really compelling. And so this is a way for people, if you want to set up young people to succeed in farming and be able to have a life on a farm, you want to get them on that point of the graph. And there are lots of ways to do that. You can generate income from the same land that your chestnuts are on in other ways. You can alley crop with vegetables. You can do things that give you a quicker return. while this economic dynamic plays out. But once you get past year 10, then you start to see increasing returns from the chestnuts. Okay, hopefully you're seeing a slide of Route 9 Cooperative here. A lot of farmers belong to this. This is in Eastern Ohio. And this is just to show that there is infrastructure developed around chestnuts and all the benefits that the farmers get from participating in this co-op, which helps them aggregate the chestnuts, share resources, process them, and market them. Okay, I'm moving on to hazelnuts here. So this shows a hazelnut shrub with a harvester moving over it. And so hazelnut breeders at Oregon State, Rutgers, the Savanna Institute, and other places they're making steady progress in breeding hybrid hazelnuts. One of the things you can see in this image is that there is a potential upper limit to the height of these shrubs if you need to drive this harvester over them. So that's an example of one of the traits that the breeders are working on is a compact shrub that can be pruned and managed in such a way that you can drive a harvester like this over the top of it. So we have productive cultivars in the Midwest, but there is work to be done improving the system and basically creating a system that integrates them in a way that works for farmers so they can harvest with this harvester so that they're pest and disease resistant, and we have clear standards around size and quality, and all of that is under development. And this would be one of the primary products for marketing hazelnuts would be oil. Hazelnuts can replace soybeans for many uses. So that again is the long-term goal for this crop would be large-scale markets where we're replacing soybeans. Okay, so Midwest superfruits. I'm going to talk about the small fruits now. What we're looking at here is another view of the Polish harvester and a farm crew at University of Illinois with black currants in totes in the back of the red pickup truck. And then the shrubs behind them are the actual black currant shrubs. And then this is a view of a harvester in Europe. There's a very well-established currant industry in Europe for all different kinds of currants. These are black currants, so you can see, you can imagine a landscape that's currently covered in rows of corn being covered in green grass and rows of shrubs. And then you have a harvester like this, harvesting, filling totes with these amazing black berries and getting them onto market. The black currants are really an amazing crop. They're highly nutritious, one of the most nutritious berries you can eat. They really do deserve the label of superfruit. You can think of them as a supercharged blueberry. They have a bit of an attitude. They have some tannin and astringency in them, but there are ways to work with that through processing and marketing. Okay, Kaitie showed the similar images. This is just showing an elderberry shrub in bloom. They're also amazing plants, really easy to grow and propagate. And this would be an example of the kind of product this is currently what is on the store shelf now. So this antioxidant type juice, that's mostly apple juice with cherry, pomegranate, and elderberry mixed in. And so we are working to bring Midwest superfruits to market in a product like this, where we would replace things like pomegranates with elderberries and black currants. So the juice market has the most potential for a large scale market. This is the primary market in Europe. There are examples of this working in the East Coast. And so it's one of our primary focuses for the Midwest is to develop a juice market. And elderberries are well established. They have several groups that are working to promote them. The Savanna Institute works with elderberries. There's the Midwest Elderberry Co-op, River Hills Harvest, the Center for Agroforestry at the University of Missouri, and many other farms are doing their own marketing of elderberries. So some of the products, some of the things we're considering is blending berries, so combining the black currants and elderberries together, or potentially combining our berries with blueberries. There's different ways to mix them and for different products. This is an example of the kind of the people and the company that we're working with. This is Taste Profit Marketing. So these are the motivated and skilled young people that do the work of marketing food products. And they have succeeded in the marketplace. So we are working with them to develop a campaign around Midwest superfruits to help with the branding and the marketing of our berry crops. This is an example of the kind of farmers that they work with. These are dairy farmers that develop their own yogurt and got national distribution on store shelves. So this is just to show that there are a lot of highly motivated young people out there who think differently and are savvy enough to connect with the right people, do the marketing work, and get products on the store shelves. Okay, this is my last slide. This is an image of one of our farms called North Farm outside of Spring Green, Wisconsin. And here I'd just like to point out much of the farm is green and covered with perennials. So what we're looking at here is a chestnut orchard inside those white tree tubes on the rolling green land in the background. And then in the foreground, where the tractor and people are, is an alley cropping system under development. So there's hazelnuts planted there, and then vegetables and other crops grown in between them. So this is an example of the type of practices we're demonstrating on our farms and the kind of farms we see being viable in the future. And there's tremendous momentum behind our work with agroforestry. We're taking a long-term view to build a foundation for viable regional food system infrastructure. Marketing and branding are key pieces of that work. And we're connecting with industry partners to integrate the agroforestry crops into mainstream markets. Part of this work involves the establishment of national working groups. We have groups for different segments of the food system, and we're actively recruiting people to join us in this work. These groups are part of a larger worldwide groundswell that will create the food system of the future. Okay, that's all for me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for that informative presentation. Thank you for sharing your expertise. We have just a few minutes left here, so why don't we jump to our Q&A section and see what we have. So first thing here, our first question is about market predictability. It says market predictability is one of the biggest challenges to scaling these crops, given the large upfront investment and multiple years prior to significant revenue. Do you have suggestions for how to mitigate this risk?
Yeah, it can be challenging. So the people that succeed, they tend to have multiple outlets for their crops. So you don't want to be dependent on one outlet. So there is work to be done around making connections, having multiple outlets, maybe having value-added products. But with the crop like chestnuts, it's relatively easy. The hard part is getting to mature production. Once you have chestnuts, you have a lot of options for marketing. There's good demand. The price point is good. Even wholesale prices to aggregators, the farmers make a good profit with that model. So there are there are ways to do it. With a crop like black currants, it's a little newer and more under development. There, you just have to get multiple markets in place and maintain relationships and do that type of work. And there'll probably be instances where some things subside, other things emerge. So you just have to be constantly working to market. But if you can do that and are good at it, the momentum and the trends are all working in our favor.
Excellent. Great. And I have a question here that is, I think, focused towards the Savanna Institute, and it asks, do you help landowners with pre-existing trees and how to utilize them as crops, like, for example, walnuts?
So this is Sven Peel, a technical service provider with Savanna Institute. Depending on, one could inventory a site and work to understand the maturity of the trees, their spacing, looking at some forestry practices, possibly some thinning, looking at some coppice agroforestry practices, also tied to thinning and tree production. Something like that could be inventoried and then weighed against production walnut systems that already are intact. It may take more than just someone like myself. We may have to reach out to the research and commercialization team or others within Savanna Institute, but something like that, if you reach out to us, we'd be willing to have a conversation with you and figure out how that can work into our technical service process. I think that's, like, I can come out there with a GPS unit and map trees and so on and so forth, but I think there's going to be a little bit more to that work. I did want to add on to what Bill had just said. I would also add diversity of your crops on a site. That way you can have income coming in, like we saw in one of the slides where there was a shrub or a tree crop, as well as, say, vegetables or running chickens in your alleys or something like that can help with the crops. Also, depending on the size, a bush is easier to replace than a tree. If that, with the hopes, obviously the hopes are that that crop does not fail in the broader context of a market. But we have seen at times different growers pull out too many of the crops or crops that weren't growing all that well. So there's a lot to this. First and foremost, it really comes down to the client and the landscape and their goals. And then we, lay all that on top of each other and see the best possibilities looking into the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Sven. And with our final minute, I know, Kaitie, you provided a text answer to this, but just maybe you want to briefly speak to it. One question from Amanda asks, can you share more about the drought tolerance of hazelnuts and others? Would you say irrigation is essential for all of these crops to be marketable?
Yeah, one note on irrigation is that with unpredictable weather and unpredictable water that we're going to be encountering as our climate continues to change, if you have access to irrigation, irrigation can help with consistent growth of the plant itself, the tree or the shrub, and then with consistent and predictable fruiting or nut production. And so if you are doing large amounts of acreage where uniform production and consistent timing is a key to your production and your business model, then irrigation is a really great choice. That being said, perennial crops are especially well suited to, especially perennial crops that are related to native trees and shrubs that exist in your native ecosystem, are designed to tolerate some of these unpredictable changes in water and weather. And so their deep perennial and extensive root systems help them access water and nutrients in place. So that's a complex question that's pretty dependent on your business goals and your landscape goals.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Kaitie. And I see we've reached our time limit here. So I think we will wrap it up. But we want to say thank you for everyone who joined us. Again, the recording of this webinar will be posted on our individual YouTube channels. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out to the Delta Institute, Savanna Institute, or the Liberty Prairie Foundation. So thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your day.